push you around a little bit or something so you're not uncomfortable?
Here's over here, Leslie. We're going on here.
I'd like to introduce you to DeAngelis, and that name may sound familiar because we've worked with Pat in the past. Pat is she works as an educator for the East Central Memory Disorder Clinic. See, I'm used to just saying Dr. Beast's office, but I have to go back and get the name correctly. She also works as a case manager within the Quest, so we've been able to help Pat with a couple of her clients, and so she really understands exactly who we are as seniors, helping seniors, what type of client we have compared to maybe somebody who does hands-on services. So Pat is an expert in her field, and she really knows what we do, so I thought she'd be a perfect fit to come in and talk to us about dementia. That's our number one. When I did the survey back in January, that was the number one thing everybody wanted to know more about. So we brought Pat in to talk to us a little bit about dementia, behaviors, and how to best approach it so that we're creating success for our clients.
Okay, thank you very much. So go ahead and eat your lunch. So I'm glad to be here. I had a little flashback just as I was coming and looking at everybody having lunch. I went way, way back to being a mom for a lunchroom. Maybe some of you can relate to that. And at that time, I remember that the only instructions we got for the hour or 2 hours that we were going to be there, only one instruction was, don't allow any food fight. I'm not going to allow any food fight today either, but I thought, wow, you know, all the time I was there, which wasn't too often, but I had 5 children, so I was lunch mom quite a few times. And every time I went, I had this idea of, what would I do if the food fight comes? You know? I wasn't quite sure. Nobody gave us instructions on that. They just said, don't allow it. So I thought that's probably how many of our caregivers feel like if you haven't had the experience of somebody that is really aggressive and doesn't want you there and is, you know, maybe saying things that are very uncomfortable for you, and also doing things and making it very well known that they don't want you, and being aggressive. What are you going to do? So if you haven't been through that, or even if you have and wasn't quite sure what to do, hopefully I can help with that some today. Before I tell you the how, which unfortunately I can't tell you exactly this is what you do, because there is no how to handle each individual situation. There's so many different subsets of the question and of the problem that there's no way anyone could tell you exactly what to do. But before you even think about the what would I do question, I like to bring up, we need to know why. To me, before we can do a how, we need to understand why is this person doing these abnormal and not acceptable behaviors. And once we understand that, it's a little easier to maybe figure out and be creative and start thinking about how can I help with this. So, I know you didn't come today to go home with a picture of a head, but you're going to. So, somebody's going to hand these out for you. And the reason I'm giving you that is that it shows the lobes of the brain, and it also gives, and I know you're eating now, so you don't have to study it or anything. I'm just going to tell you, you take it home. And light reading, right? You take it home and look at it later. But it tells you what each lobe of the brain, there's 4 lobes, and it tells you what each lobe is responsible for. And I think when you realize what all the responsibilities of each lobe, you can sort of understand that if there's a deficit, if there's an impasse there, if there's an impairment, so that those functions aren't able to be what we consider normal, then you may need to, then you can understand why there may be a problem. So I'm just going to read you a few from the frontal lobe and also the temporal lobe, which is only half of the brain. But just think about this while you're eating. Just think about if there was an impairment, if something wasn't working right for the reasoning, judgment, scheduling, imagining the future, which would be like motivation and getting something going, attention span, emotional control, body movement, personality, and speech, and also language. What if there's an impairment in language? If you have an impairment in language, what's your behavior going to be?
Frustration.
Certainly different than if you didn't have an impairment, right? Sense of smell, memory, and learning. Now that's only half the brain. So I think you can get a little idea that if we have an impairment happening in these areas, that our thinking brain, how you think is how you behave, right? The very simple explanation or very simple example that I often give is that if you're in the grocery store, any, Publix, wherever, and you're looking at all the stuff, you're reading labels, you're doing everything that you normally do when you go to shop, and somebody comes up and touches you on the shoulder and starts talking to you, like, "Hi, how are you, Wendy? How the heck are you? I haven't seen you in a long time." What's happening if you're not quite sure who I am? You're trying to figure it out, right? So you small talk while you're trying to figure out, do I know this person from church, from my neighborhood, wherever, And that's because that's how you're going to react, because you're not quite sure who this person is. Yet you want to be friendly because they obviously are being friendly to you. Now think about the other situation where somebody comes up and taps you on the shoulder and it's your sister or your family member or your child. No problem, right? You just start talking about whatever your relationship is. So our behavior is what we think about, okay? So one of the things that's happening as we get older, for everybody, is that our brain is going to shrink. Sorry, but that's the way it is. Now, one of the things that happens when we get a diagnosis of dementia, which is an umbrella of a bunch of symptoms, it's not really a disease itself. And dementia is based on subjective things most of the time. It's based on what we see and what we hear from the person, how they're acting, their functions, okay? And you as caregivers, companions, are able to help in that if there hasn't already been a diagnosis, and even if there has been, since it's a progressive disease, there's going to be changes from when they were first diagnosed many times to maybe when you are there. And so our diagnosis is basically on subjective reasoning as far as hearing and seeing things. One thing we do have that's a little more that we can count on is MRI. You've heard of CAT scans, of course. We have usually a CAT scan first and then the MRI. The MRI is a very intricate test, and it can show us that the amount of shrinkage is not equal to what the chronological age says. So if this person is 70, there's a certain amount, the radiologist knows, a certain amount of shrinkage that should be. And if there's more shrinkage than there should be at that age, that chronological age, then that will add to the diagnosis. So one of the things that happens with aggressive behavior, or any behavior, okay, it doesn't have to be aggressive behavior, just any behavior of the dementia person, is that it's a progressive disease. And so what happens is that many times there's a slower processing to the brain. So things that you may discuss and talk about with yourselves, you can process it faster, understand it, and do whatever you're talking about, right? But that doesn't happen with a dementia person. So a lot of times you could be trying to carry on a conversation, or you could be maybe wanting them to go out and walk, or you know, the usual thing, you know, maybe there's some personal hygiene that should be done, or should we, you know, do the laundry, anything that you may be working with them with. The process of what you're saying to them is much slower than normal. So maybe you've already seen this, but many times when you suggest something, the answer, what's the first answer? No, right? I think it's just it. The first answer is no, because they're not quite sure what you are even saying. Basically, as dementia progresses, one of the first things that we lose in the language part that I was talking about is that we lose the figure of nouns, which is interesting. So that means if you said a sentence with maybe, you know, 8 words in it, they could possibly have heard maybe 3. So you know that if somebody can't hear you, there's a problem, right? Because they can't understand what you said. And even if they did hear you with dementia,